Hey everybody, this is Tiffany with Boss on a Budget, and today we're going to talk about common grant applications. Hey everybody, Tiffany here. So if you're new to the grant writing world, you may have never heard of common grant applications. So what are they? They are applications that a group of funders put together. They may be a group of funders regionally that put together a common process for requesting grants for funding from their organizations. So instead of getting individual proposals or coming up with their own individual processes, the funders come together, they decide on a common format, and then they publish that as a public document, and they'll say to nonprofits, hey, just use our common grant application to apply for funding instead of something separate. Sometimes a funder will say you can apply using our process or the common grant application process. So sometimes you have a choice. But it's important for you to know that this exists for a couple of reasons. One, because if you're new to grant writing and you've never seen a proposal or you're not sure what goes in a proposal, a common grant application is like a gold mine because it helps prepare you for a general format that you should be using for most of your proposals. Sometimes funders will have a proposal format for you, but if they don't, you can use a common grant application as a guide, even if they don't specifically ask for it. It's also helpful because it streamlines the process for you, so you don't have to create new documents or reformat your narrative a different way every single time you have to submit a grant. So they really are useful tools. One thing I will say is that not every area has a common grant application. There are a couple of funders around the country who've gotten together around different regions or geographic areas for a common grant application. So in my area in Washington, D.C., we have a common grant application that you can use some of the time for some of the funders. So I've linked a website in the description box so you can see examples of common grant applications across the country. And I also thought before I signed off that I would just share with you some of the things you'll see in the common grant application and why it's genius to look at when you're applying for a grant. So first of all, it's always going to have like a cover letter or an executive summary, which gives a good rundown of everything that you're asking for. So you're going to be required to put the amount you're asking for, 2 to 3 sentences about what the heck this request is, who are you as an organization, who's the authorized representative, just some like foundational stuff that you need to have on like a cover sheet or on an executive summary. Then typically, these are the main areas that you're going to see in the common grant application. You're always going to see questions about your organization. So what's your mission? What's your vision? What are your organizational goals? Who's on your board? What are their titles, or how many board members do you have? So you make sure you have a list of those. They're going to ask what community partnerships you have, like how long have you existed in the community? What have you been doing organizationally in your community? The next big section you're going to see is about the program that you're asking money for or whatever you're asking money for. So you're going to have to give details about that, like, well, what need is it addressing? And then what are the goals of the funding that you're asking for? What are those objectives that you're going to do to reach those goals? How much is it going to cost? What's the budget? Who's working on this? What's your staffing like? How long is this going to be? What's the project timeline? So details around your project or whatever you're asking for is one of the next big sections. And then the next big section you're going to see is all about impact. So they're going to ask questions about how are you evaluating this? What are your outcome goals or your outcome measures that you're using to measure those goals? How are you going to measure success? How are we going to know that you were successful after we give you this money? So you're going to have to give some details and provide some thought about how you're going to collect data to measure whether or not you've reached your goals. So those are really the basic sections and areas of a common grant application, which is really the basic areas and sections that you'll see in most proposals. So that's why I said, again, it's really good to start practicing with a common grant application before you move on heavy into grant writing to get your feet wet. So if you have any questions for me, you can always email me at tiffany@bossonabudget.com. I have a couple of goodies in the description box below for you if you need resources or you just need help with grant writing. And I'll see you next time.